All right, everyone, here we are in our personal narrative notebook, and this is in Unit 4. And we have done quite a bit in here. All our work on the bad haircut. Earlier this week we did our quick write. We plotted that out in the plot arc, and then we copy and pasted that into our rewrite number 1 so that we hopefully had a more fleshed out story. So now we're ready for our rewrite number 2. And if you recall in the bad haircut, one of the things that we noticed that Lakeo does is he undergoes a change through the process of his cousin cutting his hair. And this shift, it can happen anywhere in the story. In this story, you really see it at the end of the story. Sometimes it can happen at the climax. It just depends. I'm going to use the same technique he did and have my shift at the end of the story because I think that's an easier way to do it. And so in the bad haircut, we see that shift when Lakeo realizes that he should not have put his trust in his cousin. And he says, so basically I trusted my cousin once and I will never trust him again for anything. All right, so he went from being a trusting little boy to someone who's just a little more careful about who he trusts. So in my story, I'm describing putting my trust in a boyfriend and how he kind of betrayed that trust by driving really dangerously. And so I had to think about, well, what was the shift that I went through? How did that experience change me from being trusting in the very beginning to what? And so I gave that some thought, and here's what I came up with. Months later, when Jonathan broke up with me, instead of being relieved, I was distraught. In a way, I had been living out the kind of risk-taking I was too careful to do myself. He was my test balloon for a lifestyle I lusted after, but was too sensible and practical to embrace. So for me, the shift is a realization. It's an internal, a realization that one of the things that I held on to in that relationship was the danger. And that I was taking risks because there were things with another person, because they were things that I was not comfortable doing myself. So what I've done is I've taken my rewrite, my number 1 rewrite here, the plot arc, I've copied it and I've pasted it into rewrite 2. And then I decided I'm going to put, since this is months later, I'm going to put my shift here at the end. And I'm going to highlight it so that when my teacher looks at my notebook, she can quickly see where I decided to place my shift. So I'm going to highlight it, go up to my highlighter, and I'm just going to highlight it in pink right there. All right? So that's rewrite number 2. Shouldn't take you very long to do. Rewrite number 3, which we're also going to do today, is to give some thought to the setting. It plays an important role in any story. And in the bad haircut, the garage is portrayed as a sinister place, foreshadowing the disaster to come. So Alkeo says, and the garage is dark, and there's not really much light, except for this old, rusty lamp. And you know how, like in the movies, when they find some ancient artifact in the dust, that was that lamp. And so notice how he uses a metaphor to describe the garage. He compares it to like an archaeological or ancient tomb. So what I got to thinking, well, what metaphor can you use to describe your setting? We really want it to be descriptive. So let's do what he did and let's use a metaphor. And so in my original story, one of the things that I had said here was that to the right of me was the Pacific Ocean, 100 feet below. So I think that's where I'm going to put my metaphor. So I'm going to say, outside my door, 100 feet below, I could hear the crash and roar of the Pacific Ocean. A giant beast whose watery jaws and jagged rock teeth waited impatiently for our deadly plunge. Okay, so here I'm comparing the Pacific Ocean to a giant beast with watery jaws and jagged rock teeth. That's a lot different than what I originally just said, the Pacific Ocean 100 feet below. So you can see how that enhances the danger of my story. So now I'm going to take my rewrite number 2. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it into rewrite number 3, because see, now it has that shift. And now I'm going to decide, well, where do I want to put my setting? And I'm just going to replace where I talked about the Pacific Ocean being 100 feet below. I'm going to replace that with my new, more descriptive metaphor. And I'm going to highlight that in a different color so my teacher can easily see where I put that. And that's very kind and helpful of you to do. All right, so that is rewrites number 2 and number 3. And you can see, look at my story now compared to my quick write. Okay, it's really building. It's getting fatter, it's getting richer, and it's getting a lot more entertaining. So look at the size of it compared to the quick write. So that's our number 2 and number 3.